So that information of that sort has penetrated that place, but he's astonished by it. And he goes on, but it does remind, the silly, tremendously silly book reminds you of where it all starts. It all starts really when you're very young. Unless the culture of the free market is somehow apparent and part of your everyday life at these earliest possible stages, then it becomes very difficult. I mean, I wonder, and I wonder in the sense of being awed by the strength of character that people have who have never been exposed to the free market in their youth and yet become attached to it later on. I think it requires great and unusual character to do it that way. Children who are exposed to it and part of it very early on could be expected, it seems to me, to be very healthy in their future. Well, why aren't more children like this? Well, I'm convinced, of course, and this is another simple prejudice of mine, my feeling is that so long as there is a public or state school system, it's uncharitable to expect that young children will be able to resist this tremendous authority that is placed over them at such an early age. They will be taught obedience. They will be taught responsiveness rather than reflection. They will be taught never to question authority, but simply to obey it. That any of them end up being libertarian is a great miracle, it seems to me. Suggesting to me that one of the primary tasks of libertarians as they pursue this common commerce of ordinary life is to, first of all, take very good care of their own children. That this is sort of item one on the libertarian agenda, is to make sure that no child of any libertarian is brought up respecting authority. That this is an absolutely essential thing for children. I understand that not everybody can withdraw their children from the public school system or from school systems. I'm not suggesting that private schools are, because they are private, superior to public schools. I don't believe that's correct at all. A school can be absolutely abysmal, whether it is operated for profit or whether it is not operated for profit. That's not the point. It's a lousy school. So first of all, the responsibility of libertarians to their children, I do not believe, can be overstated in its importance. So those of you who are producing them, have produced them, or have some attachment to them, I think that's literally job number one. Secondly, for people who are looking for places to be elected, it occurs to me that we should never overlook school boards. That this is a place to exercise libertarian influence that is very, very important. And in this, I do not believe that it would be wise to say that the only reason you want to get elected to a school board is to abolish the school. That should be your private hope. And certainly any sensible person would want to abolish the public school system, although I understand there's some contention about that in the society. It's not an altogether popular view. But nonetheless, if as a person on the school board, you see, you could do something else. You don't have to abolish school, but you could begin to abolish certain authoritarian aspects of it. You could, for instance, begin to move, as a member of the school board, toward the introduction of thinking into the curriculum of the lowest grades. Now, I do not believe personally that there is any more subversive activity in the world than encouraging thoughtfulness among children. That a child encouraged to be thoughtful at a very early age is likely to be lost to authority forever. It's a habit that is difficult to disengage from. Children who ask questions are to be revered and to be encouraged. And of course, this is exactly what schools discourage. I make this recommendation often simply because in the same spirit that I would recommend to you that you buy first-class tools rather than cheap things made in Taiwan or Turkey. I would recommend to you that you think, if you have any interest in education, that you look at materials from such a place as the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children, which is at Montclair State University in Montclair, New Jersey, because they've developed teaching materials that do not deal in facts. They deal in process, in thinking. And the materials are so exciting that most adults who see it are excited also. But children encouraged to think at an early age will be I believe, the supporters and maintainers of a free society in the future. Well, I digress in a way on this because I just think it is something that cannot be overstated, and it's important. Saving children is saving the future. It's as simple as that, isn't it? I don't have much interest in the future, actually, so this isn't altogether rational, I suppose, because I don't intend to be here for too much of the future. But I have this feeling about children in general. I think they must be important. I was one once. It was a pleasurable experience, and I'm enjoying it again. So I don't know. Well, yeah. Well, that's the only reason. Think about that one. Now, about some other things. We have been trying to encourage people in the Libertarian Party news recently to give us more and more ideas of how this remarkable network of people who are the Libertarian Party can communicate more effectively between themselves. Because I understand it's very important to communicate to the outside world. That too is part of our charge. But there is something lost when we do not communicate almost incessantly with ourselves. To the extent that any of us don't know something that someone else knows, that we can't share information, we're all made a bit poorer because of it. To the extent that we have libertarian manufacturers, for instance, I talked about this morning, to the extent that we have libertarian manufacturers with whom we do not ourselves do business, we're all made more poor because of it. If you have the choice between dealing with a machine shop operated by libertarians and one operated by statists of some sort, why go out of your way to deal with the statists? There are many competent libertarians doing many competent things. The free market yellow pages, I think, is a good step toward that. I would hope that the Libertarian Party itself could be another step in making possible communications and dealings with libertarian producers. So we're asking people, and I ask you specifically, to help us think of ways in which, particularly electronically, we can communicate more effectively, more quickly, and more fully than we ever have. Because my own feeling, and that's really what it is just my own feeling and impression, is that the long-term importance of this conspiracy called libertarianism is the people we know and the people with whom we stay in touch. That it is as a network that the party has its most emphatic cultural impact and could have its most emphatic commercial impact. And so ideas are certainly welcome. We've had wonderful suggestions so far, and we'll start publishing them in the next issue of the Libertarian News, the deadline for which is June the 9th. For that or anything else you care to communicate with us about. The suggestions so far range from trying to sign up a special interest group on some big commercial service like CompuServe or the Source, or setting up our own bulletin boards, such as the one Liberty Bell that now exists in California and operates occasionally. Yeah.
You need to check out Genius, a new large network, and the prices are a lot better, and you don't get lost in the maze.
Good. That, as a matter of fact, one letter did suggest that, but here verified that that's a good Genius, right? And there's the well.
It's Genie, GE, Network of Information Exchange.
Okay. Well, many things like this. As a matter of fact, if you have extended experience with it, I mean, sort of, we should write us about it so we can publish your comments on it. The same goes for everybody here. If you have any experience or any suggestion about this sort of communications, that would be fine. Which is not to say that that this in any way should intrude on normal communications, like the written word in postcards or anything else. There's one development in the party that I'm very pleased to find. I have long felt that you can look at the problems of the world as so overwhelming that you might not choose to get up in the morning, or you can break them down in some sensible fashion so that they seem approachable. And my own breaking down of them has always been to say that the United States of America, which is to me a great fiction, I don't know where it is, but I do know that there are 3,000 political subdivisions in this country that make some geographic sense. They're the counties of the United States. Now, there are only 3,000 of them. You see, the United States isn't a political place of sort of incomprehensible size. It's a finite thing. Anybody can come to grips with 3,000 anything. 3,000 pennies, that's not much money. 3,000 in-laws is a lot of in-laws. But here you have this thing. Now, I notice that in the Libertarian Party, there's more and more activity identified at the county level. Newsletters, various activities, and this is very fine because it means that, let's see, we've got one county that we can be responsible for. That only leaves 2,999, and California will take care of 30 or 40 of them. New York State, another. You see, the number begins to diminish very rapidly. If each of us could be responsible for our own county, in the sense of communicating with people in other areas and doing things, very soon the thing that we call national, or problems that we call national, would really fade out. They would become simply the interrelationships of 3,000 finite geographical areas. Interesting possibility, and one I'm pleased, I think the party is moving roughly in that direction. Well, what else is going on? I meant to say it at the outset this morning, and I must say it now, that it really does seem ironic to be speaking about liberty in an area represented by your senator.
Had to bring that up.
Well, I think people should be responsible for certain things in their area. I understand that you didn't elect him or anything, but you have to be called in that big roll call up yonder when the NatCom is meeting in the clouds. You'll have some responsibility for this. I mean, of all the egregious clown-like enemies of freedom in the United States Senate, you have managed to send a person who not only offends reason at every turn, but offends liberty at every turn. My Lord, what an absolute raging, flaming anus this man is. So I don't know what you can do about it, but perhaps something will occur to you. I really think making fun of him more might be appropriate. Where is it? Is it, Jim, is it the Georgia party that presents the Crackpot Award?
That's right.
Well, I had never been more delighted in my life that Georgia, we'll have a piece describing this in the paper shortly so you can emulate it, but in Georgia they're rather like, you remember William Proxmire's Golden Fleece Awards, an excellent idea, perhaps by the wrong person, but nonetheless an excellent idea. Well, in Georgia they present these detailed awards for asinine accomplishment by the legislators, and they're very careful about this. Those people are really first class. Yes?
Karl, excuse me for interrupting you, but John Harvey has done the same thing in South Carolina with some of his awards.
Wonderful. Well, I hope, John, I'm so new to all of these things that I can just repeat what I've most lately heard. I think it's one of the finest ideas yet, and I'm sure, because I've been an admirer of your work for so long, that I'm sure yours will delight me just as much. But I just think that is important, to make fun of these people where appropriate, because they really, it's not that they're monsters, it's that they're idiots. And to dignify them as monsters is probably a mistake. You know, I don't think there's an old saying I heard, I don't know how old it is, but I heard it some time ago, that you must never ascribe to evil what can be explained by simple stupidity. And I believe that this is probably a very wise thing to keep in mind. So ridiculing some of these folks might be a useful enterprise. In other words, the Libertarian Party in any given area could be outraged by things. That God, you know, you can be outraged just waking up in the morning. But I'm not too sure that is as effective as being amused. Really, that sometimes people, if you're outraged, people will respond by circling the wagons. You know, they'll say, oh, well, they're just attacking a fine man, and all of that. Attacks sometimes make people very defensive. But if you begin to say that it's just laughable and idiotic, then who knows, some people may laugh with you. It's an interesting possibility and tactic. I'd like to see more of it. And John, you're going to start this again?
I hope so.
Oh, I do too. I think at the national level, of course, it has great possibilities also. The only problem being finding a jury of such sensitivity is to be able to sort it out. You could probably just take the congressional record at random and find candidates. Were yours public presentations? Did you like the Academy?
When I showed up, we did it at the South Carolina 10th anniversary.
Aha. Well, I think I tell you, I really think every party, every local party, every state party should attend to these media possibilities, because it's really in this way that we have tremendous impact. And it's all free. It's all free. Making a statement is free. Various events that you have, they're all free. I was so struck by David's description today of a certain economic problem. And it seemed to me immediately that could be translated quickly into a local activity such as this. But you could take a local person, a real and living person, and do an actual and serious financial study of what that person's life would be like if their paycheck could be devoted to buying a private pension fund in the free market as opposed to Social Security funds. Take the two budgets, what this person would be like investing the money in something local, perhaps. Making the examples close to home as compared to the estimated 1% annuity value of the Social Security contribution. And that this is the sort of thing that can make awareness and make friends locally. Another favorite notion of mine, and I'll give you a variation of it, I've always thought that taking the Declaration of Independence into the public just as a document and asking people if they'd sign it as a petition is useful, because, as you know, whenever this has been done, the majority of people refuse to sign it on the basis that it is a dangerous and undoubtedly communist document. And when you announce this, the fact that most people are afraid to sign the Declaration of Independence, you make a point that could not be made by simpler rhetoric. You've made it by demonstration. A similar proposal, which we intend to follow in somewhere or another in the Libertarian Party news, has been to take the platforms of the three parties and without labels on them, and just ask people, taking the essential points, which they prefer, the betting being that a remarkable number of people would say, well, certainly I agree with this one, being the Libertarian position, as opposed to either the Republican or Democrat position. These two, if these things are done and announced, make points beyond attack or ordinary rhetoric. Well, there are many things like that, and I needn't dwell on them. I guess I needn't dwell on anything, as a matter of fact. I was blissfully unaware of speaking this evening because I cleverly contrived to leave at home the entire schedule of this event and everything about it. So I began the morning by not being where I was supposed to speak in the morning. And if it weren't for just pleasant circumstances, I'd probably be in a movie this evening. I'm totally disorganized. Get me 5 feet away from my Macintosh and I don't know anything. So I will stop now and simply invite again that we might have a discussion of anything if you want to talk about anything, or we can get on to anything else that, yes.
When you mentioned the comparison of the three major party platforms, were you thinking about producing that in a manner that can be easily duplicated?
Yeah, I was thinking, well, now I'll ask your advice on this. The suggestions have been that the fairest way to do it would be to use the full text, but I think that would have practical difficulties, that you simply couldn't have something that people. So I think a rigorously fair summary thing of just the major points, foreign policy, civil liberties, something like that might be the way to do it. And we thought of doing it for something along those lines for the next outreach issue. The deadline for which, I forget, but it's not...
September the 9th.
September the 9th. We'll try, thank you. September the 9th. We will try to publish try to remember to publish a schedule of deadlines in the paper. There are many things that aren't done in the paper, largely because of my own inability to keep things orderly around the house. So you'll be patient with it. It will sooner or later, anything that you can think of that should be done, if you let us know about it, will eventually probably get done. But it will be a slow and torturous process because we're all just finding our way through this thing. Yeah, well, so we'll try to do something that can be used. If nothing,
I've heard a little bit about your personal history,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm fairly interested. It seems like you've traveled the whole spectrum of political belief. I'm kind of interested, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, how you moved through all these.
Well, I didn't move much. That's I think that's largely an illusion that comes out of the popular descriptions of politics. I was brought up by a mother who was doggedly anti-authoritarian, who did not want me to go to school, but I ignored her good advice and went until I was 15, by which time it was still possible to save my mind, I believe. Her earlier advice to never go was certainly superior, so I had that background. She never answered a question. For instance, she just took me someplace where I could find an answer. My favorite recounting of that is that I didn't know her name. I knew it was Mother, but I asked her about her name because other people seemed to have names that weren't Mother. And this aroused my curiosity. And so rather than telling me what her name was, I only have a vague recollection of what it was, as a matter of fact. She took me to the district government building and taught me how to look up birth certificates. Well, you can't, first of all, when you're like that and you get interested in politics, what can you do? There are not many places you can go. I tried to be a communist when I was about 14 or something, and the communists are entirely too serious to let young people in. But they seemed, because this was the time of the Spanish War. And anybody who wasn't excited by that just he wasn't excitable. It was very exciting. Music was terrific. They had unquestionably the best music. And in a world for a 14-year-old kid, how would any 14-year-old choose politics? Music. Who has the best music? Democrats? No. Republicans? Communists, great. But I couldn't get to be a communist. Or I would have become an anti-communist a lot sooner. if I had only got to be one. So I went to the next best thing I thought was to be a socialist. So I joined the Norman Thomas Socialist Party. And I was about 14, I guess that was about right. So I went to one meeting, and I discovered that what these folks were saying was that everything in the world would be fine if everybody in the world was exactly like me. And since I thought these folks were fairly dull, I didn't think that was a sound political principle. So I didn't get to be a socialist. I mean, I joined, but I didn't stay. 1 week, that's about right for a 14-year-old, isn't it? So I then looked around with I don't want to offend your patrimony here or anything, but I investigated the Democrats, and that just, that was immediately laughable. I mean, this was a real bunch of clowns being led at the time by this monstrous Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, I can tell you, even a teenager, it seemed to me, could look at that person and tell that there was something other than democracy going on in the back of his mind. So I didn't become a Democrat. And then I read about Republicans. And you know, what an amazing thing. This, because you're all so terribly young, this will come as a shock to you. But Republicans, you won't believe this. Okay, I'll try. Republicans once stood for the free market, for an anti-interventionist foreign policy, and for individual freedom. Now, don't take my word for it. It's in the documents somewhere, unless they've got to. So I got to be a Republican, and I remained a Republican as long as I could. And then I discovered that that all of that business wasn't true. Then I met Murray Rothbard. I didn't meet him. I read something by him in Ramparts, which was a magazine of the New Left. And I read it, and I was shocked by it because he talked about anarchists. And I said, God, I'd never heard of these people before, but it's what I thought Republicans were. So I called Murray up on the telephone. This was in the mid-'60s. I'd been through the Goldwater thing. I called him on the telephone, and I said, you don't know me, I'm sure, but I just read this thing that described the kind of politics I thought I'd been practicing for all of these years, and now I understand it's anarchists. Tell me about these people. And I went up to New York and went through the Rothbard University quick course in his living room. And lo and behold, I discovered, my God, I wasn't a Republican at all. I was an anarchist. And ever since then, there's been a great deal of difficulty because certain people in my family tell me that if I use the word more than several times in any given calendar year, they will break my kneecaps. But it is irresistible. So I don't think I've really changed. I've just spent all my life trying to figure out who was attached to freedom. And I've tried everybody I could think of, and they've all been a little bit attached to it. I mean, let's face it, they're Republicans. After all, I was a Republican when Senator Robert Taft, the senior senator, was alive and casting the only vote against the Second World War. Well, you know, that's pretty high-class stuff. So some Republicans have really been tremendous. I worked with people like Frank Chodorow. You know, he wasn't a Republican, but he never told me he was an anarchist. I tell you, these people shouldn't go around hiding what they are because it confuses young people. It certainly confused me. But anyway, there are a lot of things like that. So I don't think I've changed much. I just never understood what I was. I didn't understand it had a name. I'm not sure that it makes any difference that it has a name, but I'm glad to know it does. So that's how I got there, or here, and it's comforting to know that there's no place else to go. It's one of the nicest things about liberty is that there simply is no place else to go. I mean, that's it. I mean, once you take the position that people have the responsibility of ordering their own lives, what else is there to say? You don't have to save the world anymore. You don't have to run anybody's life. All you have to do is attend to your own and try to make sure as possible that everyone else has the responsibility of taking care of their life. And that's really comforting. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
I was wondering something that you've talked about before on a number of, you've read some things you were talking about community development projects and that sort of thing. And I was wondering, and I know that for example, you mentioned the Hatfield's attempt to get that started on several occasions, and some other things. And I was wondering how that's come along, whether you've been working. I haven't read anything from you on that issue for a while, and I was wondering if you were still
I am indeed
working on that.
Yeah, thank you. Let me tell you what the Hatfield proposal was. I think it's the only radical piece of legislation ever proposed in the Senate of the United States. I mean, back through history. It's the one piece of radical legislation. Mark Hatfield, senator from Oregon, introduced legislation some years ago, many years ago, God, 20 years ago, 15? Some 15 years ago, in which he proposed that a community of people constituting themselves as a neighborhood, that is, identifying themselves as a neighborhood, and he meant neighborhood. Like, I don't know how the neighborhoods in Charlotte operate, for instance, but there are places when you go in this town, I'm sure, and you ask people, where am I? They say you're in East Charlotte, or you're in something, the Meadowbrook, or God knows, a million names for neighborhoods. But people know it. They understand it's a place that has boundaries. And his proposal was that any place constituting themselves consciously as a neighborhood be permitted to withhold I believe it was 80% of all taxes they would ordinarily pay to the federal government, that out of that neighborhood, that those taxes be held in the neighborhood for community development purposes, to be used for cooperatives, for community corporations, as the seed capital for a community corporation, or anything that the community was involved in. Well, he called it the starvation solution. And it occurs to me that's a perfectly brilliant idea, because it means that being simply, the federal government would have 20% of the budget, because who would choose to give up the 80% that you could keep at home? So that, of course, it got some co-sponsors, and I mean, and I'm glad you reminded me, I mean to talk to Mark about that, see what he's done about it lately, and also to ask him a question that I want to ask more people who have had libertarian tendencies. I want to ask him, why aren't you a libertarian? I would like to ask this of Willie Nelson, of Clint Eastwood, of various people like that, because if you think, and of, Burt Reynolds, who's made some absolutely anarchistic movies. And why aren't you a libertarian? You know, I mean, you talk like one, you do things in that way. A lot of musicians are like this. But with Hatfield, I want to find out where, now, as for community development for the Libertarian Party particularly, I believe that there are still great opportunities because of the rhetoric of the enterprise zone. Now, the Reagan enterprise zone is a semi-phony, I really believe. It just means low taxes so that you can get some ricky-ticky corporation to start treating East Harlem about the way they treat Jamaica. It's not exciting at all. It's not Hong Kong. You see, a free enterprise zone should be Hong Kong. It shouldn't be North Carolina, or the way North Carolina or Guatemala is treated. It should be Hong Kong. Now, if libertarians in any congested area could advocate a real enterprise zone, a Hong Kong, rather than this halfway version, I think they might have some possibilities. Or, even better, if libertarians in any given area could start one on their own. That is, begin to act as though they lived in a free society already, to flagrantly and publicly practice free market economics out in the open, that might be a possibility, particularly in league with poor people. to try to make the point that I think is an important point for libertarians to make, to try to make the point that freedom and the free market is the only long-term solution to poverty. Wealth is the only long-term solution to poverty. And until people who are poor can begin to create wealth, they will always be poor. I mean, you're not unpoor simply because you're getting $480 a month from the federal government or something. You're poor. You're poor, and you'll stay poor. The only way to get out of the underclass is to get out of it. It's not to be subsidized to stay in it. And so maybe there are ways. I talked to, near Swannanoa, in Asheville, I met a libertarian businessman who thought, by golly, he could make a lot of money off a free market approach to poverty. If he could get poor people who had nowhere else to go, train them to do things, and then not hire them out or something. You know, there was sort of a shoddy way to do things, but to back them in starting businesses that he would own a hunk of, that he might, at a swoop, be able to start to end their poverty and also make himself rich, because it does occur to me that it's a very insensitive person who would simply want to make somebody else rich when they could also share in it themselves. And so there are many opportunities, immense opportunities at the community level. A libertarian daycare center strikes me as such a good answer to this mounting cry for government daycare centers. Or, and to show alternatives. It is, you can have many kinds of daycare centers. For-profit, community ones, co-op ones, not co-op ones. There's so many things. Community development, I still think, is a first-class opening for, let's say, for free marketers, which should include all libertarians. Yeah. Thank you for having me here and asking such good questions.
Glad to hear Karl talk about comedy. It reminded me that one of the things I was going to mention to you tonight. The other night I caught a show on television, a comedian called Gallagher. I don't know whether you've heard of him or not. But he started out his show with talking about words, and what he started talking about reminded me of a book by Irwin Schiff you may have heard of, called The Biggest Con, how the government is fleecing you. And what Gallagher said, where words are very interesting, and we've got this thing up there called the Congress. Now, what's the opposite of a con? Why, it's pro, right? So, as long as we've got a Congress, we're never going to have any progress. This is national television. That's really great. Now, I think the most important thing this evening that I would like to do is to thank Linda Janka for putting on this convention. She really did do it all herself, and I'm very, very grateful for that. We have a few more things going on this evening. We have Karl Hess's award-winning film, and an offer of some guitar music, I think, later on. So, are there any other announcements?
Let's party.
Let's party, okay. Get the projector set up and see the film.